Good morning, everyone. I'm Megan. I'm an alcoholic. I have been through this process with the help of a Big Book Step Study sponsor. Meetings like this, people like you, and a higher power that I found in this program. Is there feedback? Or is it? Okay. All right, cool. I'm really nervous up here this morning. Let me finish. I'm working on my amends, and I try to practice all the steps to the best of my willingness. I've been sitting in this meeting Saturday mornings for about a year and a half. And for most meetings, I have thought like, oh man, I can't wait to get up there. I can't wait to get up there. And now that I'm up here, I changed my mind. So.
I'm just going to turn this a little bit. There we go.
Yeah, my hands are sweaty and my heart is racing. And it's kind of funny because I actually do a lot of public speaking for work, but normally I have like objectives and PowerPoint slides, and I wanted to make them for this step this morning, but we didn't have a screen. So when reading through this step today, it's funny because there's so much that I can identify with in this chapter, from the story of Jim sitting at, a place where he just went in to order a sandwich. There was a place like that for me in Burlington, Vermont, where I used to live before I got sober, or as I was trying to get sober, and like sitting down thinking I would just order a sandwich, and then ended up, multiple beers and several whiskeys in, wondering what had happened. But the few themes that I pulled out of this were unmanageability and insanity. And so, for me to talk about this, I think it's helpful to kind of look at what unmanageability and insanity were like for me. And so I need to talk a little bit about the problem, but I do want to focus more on the solution and what my life is like today. Because today, I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love this meeting, but it wasn't always like that. So when I was 3 or 4 years old, my parents got divorced, and I remember sitting in the court-appointed family attorney's office at 4, and him asking me, who do you want to live with, Megan, your mom or your dad? And that was kind of a traumatic experience for a kid, that old. I was an older sister at the time. My brother was 2 years younger. But what ended up coming out of that is I spent most of my childhood with my dad, and he brought me up in a church that was pretty, extreme, I guess. It was like they had a lot of opinions on outside issues, I guess. But one of them was that, my mom was going to hell, and that I would not see my mom. When I went to heaven, she would be going to hell. That's what they told me. They also told me that if you were not straight, that's not okay. And so, whatever whatever was happening for me in terms of identity when I was a kid, that was kind of pushed aside as not even a possibility that I could entertain, because that would equal eternal damnation. So I got kind of good, I guess, at keeping a secret, keeping that secret, because I wanted my parents to approve of me. I wanted everybody to approve of me. I loved rules and following rules, and I thought that was sort of breaking a rule. So that's a secret that I kept hidden, and that was good practice for later on when I wanted to keep my alcoholism a secret. And I actually didn't really pick up a drink until I was 17 at my high school graduation party. I was the kind of kid who wanted to, impress everybody and make my parents happy. So even at high school parties, if I ended up there and there was somebody drinking, I would call my mom and say, "Mom, you got to come pick me up. Somebody's drinking here. I can't be here," which is hilarious. but when I went off to college, things sort of took off, and I think like this idea of my own, identity and sexuality started to come a little bit more to the forefront, and so I had to work harder to stuff it down, and I used alcohol to work at that. So, I made it through college somehow, and I thought, this drinking is not a problem if I work hard enough at my studies and, getting a job and all the letters after my name, then I can drink as much as I want. I earned it, right? Like, it doesn't matter if I'm putting Bailey's in my coffee as I go to take an exam in the morning. I passed, who cares? And I'm not, I told myself I'm not hurting anybody. And, it's around this time when I started to have depression and anxiety come up more in my life. And, I don't really want to talk about what I do for work too much because it's not really relevant, but it starts to demonstrate insanity for me because I'm a pharmacist and I was sitting there taking antidepressants and drinking and thinking depression is the problem, right? And if I were to look at somebody's medical chart, a patient case, and see, oh, they're on this antidepressant, but they drink a fifth of bourbon a day, gee, what's the problem? But for myself, I couldn't see it. I was completely delusional. So, it started to occur to me that maybe I wasn't drinking like other people. I was living with roommates at the time during college, and I was probably drinking more than them, but I got a lot more practice at keeping that a secret, keeping that hidden from my roommates, from my family, kind of keeping up this charade of oh yeah, I'm just having as much wine as you, but then, I'll go and hit the bar when I think nobody's looking, to, so sort of satisfy that craving. But after college, I moved around a bit, but ended up in Vermont with, my dream job. I had come out at the time and sort of thought I had gotten away from the church a few years earlier, and I thought, okay, I can sort of be out more comfortably in Vermont than where I was, because it's a little bit more accepted there, I thought. And so I had, my dream job. I had a woman I was dating at the time. We dated for a few years. I bought a house. We got engaged. So I had all the things that I thought you would want. And I was still really unhappy and couldn't really figure it out. And I was in therapy at the time, and the therapist had sort of brought up to me a few times, do you think maybe you drink too much? And I was like, no. And she said, oh, well, maybe you have bipolar type 2 disorder. And I thought, yes. Yes, that's the answer, right? I could take a pill for that. I don't have to really work hard, right? That, awesome. That is great. I have a diagnosis that is not alcoholism, because I didn't want to face it. And I had, about a month after I got engaged and bought the house, my fiance suggested, maybe you should stop drinking for a little bit. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll prove to you that I don't have a problem with alcohol. You are the one that has an abnormal relationship with alcohol. So I stopped for a month, and I went to AA meetings, and I thought, see, I can do this. It's not a problem. And I thought, just like they talk about in here in terms of self-knowledge, I thought this is just something that I have to outsmart. I have to work harder and figure it out and intellectualize it. And it didn't really hold together for all that long. The engagement broke off a few months later. I got into a different relationship that was long distance, and I wasn't handling it well because I was living in my house then alone, and which meant that really I could drink the way that I wanted to drink, and my alcoholism had me isolated. And it came to a point where in June of 2016, I was working at a hospital at the time, and I went into work intoxicated 2 times in a week. The first time, I didn't actually make it into work. I had driven to the parking garage and fell as I got out of my car because I was so drunk and hit my head. And I was brought in as a code blue to the emergency department where I worked and was taken care of by my coworkers. And they were actually pretty good in terms of protecting my privacy. And I thought, like, okay, I can manage this, right? Like, I've got my, my patient chart is protected and my boss isn't going to find out. And like, working so hard to keep this secret again, to keep anybody from finding out. And then a week later, I did it again, but I actually made it into work. And a coworker said to me, Meghan, are you okay? And I said, no. She said, have you been drinking? And I said, yep. And she let my manager know, and I was relieved from duty. And I took a medical leave from work, and I went to rehab. And I still sort of thought at the time, like, I didn't want to stop. I just wanted to figure out how to get it under control. And I was in a rehab with all sorts of different people. And, I don't want to get away from the singleness of purpose, but there was really only one other alcoholic there. Most other people had other substance abuse issues. And so I thought that was a way that I could distinguish myself from everybody else. And I thought, I don't belong here, right? I don't do crack. I don't do heroin. Like, I am just an alcoholic, and I'm not as bad as you, right? And I don't like the food here, so I'm only going to stay for 7 days. And so I thought, like, the food is not contributing to my wellness plan. And they're not letting me exercise as much as I want, so this isn't for me. So I left. But I thought, like, okay, I still need to figure this out. So I went to some AA meetings, and I got a sponsor in Burlington, and I told him, like, look, I did step 1 in rehab. I'm ready to go on to the next thing. Let's check off these boxes. I'm ready to, like, get my character defects fixed, make some amends, and have a spiritual awakening. Let's go. And he was like, all right, well, let's go back to step 1. He could see. And, he could see that I didn't really want to stop, and I hadn't admitted powerlessness. And I fought it. I fought it for another year and a half after that. And, that included, leaving AA, going back out, thinking, I could stop on my own. And, like, obviously it fell apart. I ended up, I kept my job for a little while, but I ended up being placed into protective custody. There were some family members that knew I was on a bender. They called the South Burlington police, and the police came into my home to place me into protective custody. And I thought, how dare you come into my house? You can't do this, right? Like, you can't handcuff me in my own home. I'm not hurting anyone. And I was so mad at the police officers that I decided to not put on shoes. It was December, and I was so mad, like, I'm gonna show you. And so he threw me in the back of the cop car, and he was nice enough to give me some shoes. But I spent the night in a jail cell, and that was when I surrendered. And I thought, like, I can't keep doing this, right? Now I'm in a jail cell. I have been in an institution, and I know what the next step is, and I don't want to go there. That was December 13th, 2016. So I knew at that point that I needed to stop, right? Like, I had tried everything. I had tried, all the stuff that they talk about in here, taking more exercise. I was going to become a yoga teacher at one point. I was like all of this stuff. And I thought, like, so I can figure out exactly, based on my body weight, how quickly I metabolize alcohol so I can have 1 drink every other hour with some water in between. Like, I had this whole formula figured out. And none of it worked. Like, none of it. After things fell apart, I lost my job. I had to move out of my home because I couldn't find work in Burlington, so I moved to Worcester, and I was pissed, right? Like, I didn't want to be here. I got a job here, but, was really, really unhappy. And, I thought, like, I don't belong here. It took me a few months to realize that, like, no, you need to get your butt back into a meeting. And I found this meeting through my sponsor. And thank God, right? Like, so it took me a while to get step one. But I think, part of it is because it's really scary to be at step one without the rest of the 11 steps, right? Like thinking about, I am powerless and my life is unmanageable. Like, I was terrified to be in that space, thinking like, I have gotten, as far as I had in my life on my own will. And, now I had to admit this secret, right? Like, I'm an alcoholic and I am powerless over my disease, which, like, was completely humbling. But, I think once I was able to admit that and start this work, start these steps, it did, my sponsor, like, one of the first things she taught me was how to count, that I need to do step one before I can do the other steps. And she also taught me how to pray. And through the miracle of this program, unmanageability for me today looks very different. Like, the most unmanageable thing I have in my life today is figuring out how to feed 3 dogs at one time, right? Like, that's it. It's like pretty not that exciting, and I am okay with that, right? Like, I get to come here and I get to be with all of you on a Saturday morning and, like, look out and see faces of people that I know, we have elements of the same story. And, even if things get crazy for me today, like, I know what to do. And before, the only solution that I had was drinking. But today I know, like, I can pray, which for, a long time I thought prayer was for schmucks. But today, it's a very different tool for me. I can meditate. I can talk to another alcoholic. I can get to a meeting. And all of those things can completely turn around, whatever that insanity was. Because the reality is, as my friend Tina likes to say, I have alcoholism and not alcoholism, right? So insanity and unmanageability and crazy things will still come up because that is life for me today. But the difference is that I know what to do with it in a way that is much more productive. And, I can be of service to others. I can go to bed at night and, like, review my day and think, okay, maybe I was helpful to somebody today. There was probably some things I could do better, right? Like, that's later in the steps. But I can also wake up the next morning and not think like, oh shit, what did I do last night, right? And that's such a freeing feeling. So I think that's about it. If you're thinking about doing this work, please, wherever you are in the process, just checking it out in the middle of your writing, like whatever it is, just keep going because you're absolutely worth it. Thanks.
Thanks.